The echoes of Egyptian drums shattered the silence of the night as the Hebrew slaves bent under the weight of their sorrow. The whip came down mercilessly, leaving marks on their skin and souls. In the midst of that darkness, a small basket floated, gently on the waters of the Nile. Inside, a baby slept, unaware that his life was about to intertwine with the destiny of an entire nation. That child would become the voice of freedom for an enslaved people. This is not just a story of brutal slavery, but of divine redemption that stood against one of the most powerful empires in history. It's the account of a man chosen to be a guide through the desert, of a people forged through fire and trials, and of an eternal promise that would shape generations. No god of Egypt could stop his calling. No sea could close in his path. No army could stand against him, because when the Creator rises to set his people free, there is no human or celestial force that can hold him back. The people of God were not born to be slaves. How did a hidden child challenge an empire? How did the sea part in obedience? How did a nation walk 40 years in the desert and still survive? This is not just a story from the past. It is a warning, an eternal cry, a living revelation. Let my people go. Over the years, Israel multiplied in Egypt. What had once been a blessed refuge in Joseph's time slowly turned into a ruthless prison. A new Pharaoh rose to power, one who didn't know Joseph or understand the sacred connection with the Hebrews. He looked at them with suspicion, with fear. "There are too many of them," he said. "If they rise against us, they might join our enemies and escape." To him, the solution was clear: enslave the people of promise. The children of Jacob, the descendants of Abraham, were chained and forced to build cities for their oppressors. But the more they were afflicted, the more they multiplied. Fear grew in Pharaoh's heart, so he issued an even more terrible decree. Every male child born among the Hebrews shall be thrown into the Nile. A muffled cry of despair filled every Israelite home. Hope was replaced by the weeping of trembling mothers. But in a small house from the tribe of Levi, amidst tears and silence, a child was born destined to change history: Moses. "I can't. Let them kill him," his mother thought. For 3 long months she hid him, fearing that any sound could be a death sentence. But time was running out, so she made a decision of faith. She prepared a basket, sealed it with tar, and placed her son inside. "God, I give him to you," she whispered through tears. Miriam, his sister, watched her, not fully understanding. "What are you going to do, Mother?" she asked fearfully. "I'll place his life in God's hands. There's nothing more I can do. It's all I have," she replied, her soul breaking. The little basket floated among the reeds of the river, gliding through waters that had already seen so many innocents die. But this time, heaven had other plans. The child wasn't touched by death, because his life had a divine purpose. Pharaoh's daughter went down to the river. Her eyes landed on the basket. She opened it. The baby cried. Her heart, moved by an unexplainable force, broke. "It's a Hebrew child, but I'll raise him as my own." And so, the deliverer of Israel grew up in the very heart of Egypt. He received a prince's education, learned science, language, and the art of war. But his soul didn't belong there. He was Hebrew. And one day, he would find out in the most painful way. Moses lived surrounded by riches, but his heart burned to know his roots. He walked among the slaves. Their hands were broken, their faces worn by suffering. And then he saw it. A taskmaster was beating a Hebrew brutally. Again and again, rage burned inside Moses. He looked around. No one else was there, just the oppressor and the victim. He took a step, then another. And then he acted. His hand rose. The Egyptian fell lifeless. Silence. The Hebrew ran away. Moses buried the body in the sand and fled. But the next day, trying to stop a fight between 2 Hebrews, one of them confronted him. "Who made you a judge? Are you going to kill me like you did the Egyptian?" Fear overwhelmed him. His secret was out. Pharaoh found out. He ordered his death. Moses ran. He left the palace, left the people he was meant to free. He fled without direction until he reached a strange land, Midian. There he found refuge. Years passed. He married Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, and became a shepherd. Egypt faded into the past. The mission slipped through his fingers like sand, but God hadn't forgotten him, because one day, on the mountain of God, the fire called. The sheep grazed peacefully along the slopes of Mount Horeb when something unusual caught his attention. A bush was burning with fire, but it wasn't consumed. Moses approached carefully, his steps slow and curious. And then, from the flames, a voice resounded with heavenly authority. "Moses," he answered, trembling, "here I am." "Don't come any closer," said the voice. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." Moses fell to the ground, covering his face with his hands. He knew he was standing before something eternal. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." His body trembled, his soul bowed before the eternal, but God wasn't finished. "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries. I've come down to rescue them and bring them to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's why I'm sending you to Pharaoh. You will bring my people out of slavery." Moses looked up. The fire still burned. The voice echoed in his mind, but fear clouded his heart. "Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to free Israel?" he murmured. "I will be with you," God said. "And this will be the sign. When you've brought the people out, you'll worship me on this mountain." Moses still hesitated. "If they ask your name, what should I tell them?" And God replied, "I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent you." Moses fell again. The one who had fled Egypt, who had buried his past in the sand, was now receiving a mission that seemed impossible. He had no army, no power, no influence, only a promise. God would be with him. And with that certainty, Egypt would come to know the power of the God of Israel. He came down from the mountain, the fire still etched in his memory. The divine voice kept resonating inside him, but the burden was heavy. He felt weak, unworthy. "Lord, I've never been eloquent, not before and not now. My tongue is slow," he confessed. And God replied, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Isn't it I, the Lord? Now go, I'll be with you. I'll teach you what to say." Moses, still resisting, pleaded, "Please, send someone else." Heaven paused for a moment. Then God said, "Your brother Aaron will speak for you. I will be with both of you. Take this staff. With it, you'll perform signs." And so Moses left the desert behind. The man who once fled as a fugitive returned as a messenger of the Most High. Alongside Aaron, he gathered the elders of Israel and told them every word from God. They believed, they bowed down and worshipped, because they understood that even when heaven seemed silent, God had never forgotten them. Moses and Aaron entered Pharaoh's palace. Before them, the throne gleamed with gold, ivory, and pride. Pharaoh looked at them with disdain. Egypt was the most feared power on earth, and, to his eyes, these two men were nothing but dust. But Moses raised his staff and spoke firmly. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness." Silence took over the hall, and then Pharaoh laughed mockingly. "Who is this Lord, that I should obey his voice? I don't know your God, and I will not let Israel go." He gave orders to his overseers. "If they have time to talk about freedom, then they're not working hard enough. From now on, they won't be given straw to make bricks. Let them find it themselves, but the daily quota will not change." And if they fail, they'll be punished. The burden on the people became even more unbearable. Hebrew foremen were beaten and humiliated. The people cried out in despair. They turned against Moses. "You promised us deliverance, and now our suffering is even greater. Why did you speak to Pharaoh?" Moses lifted his eyes to heaven. "Lord, why are you allowing this? Ever since I came to speak to him, his cruelty has only increased, and you still haven't rescued your people." Then God spoke. His voice left no room for doubt. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand I will force him to let my people go. I am the Lord. I remembered my covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will bring them out of Egypt. They will be my people, and they will know that I am their God." God gave Moses signs and sent him again before Pharaoh. But this time Moses didn't return as a mere shepherd. He came clothed in the power of the Creator. Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh. Aaron spoke clearly. "This is what the Lord says, let my people go." Pharaoh remained unmoved. Then Moses gave the sign, "Aaron, throw down your staff." He did, and as it hit the ground, it turned into a snake. Pharaoh's counselors grew uneasy, but the king was unimpressed. He called his magicians. They too threw down their staffs, and they became snakes. However, Aaron's snake devoured the others. Egypt's wise men trembled, but Pharaoh's heart grew hard. "This is just a cheap trick. My answer is still no. Israel will not leave." And so, God's judgment on Egypt began. Not with diplomacy, but with force. The power of heaven would fall upon the most arrogant nation on earth. Pharaoh had rejected warnings, had despised mercy. Now signs would come that Egypt would never forget. The first plague was a sentence upon their pride. The Nile, the river that gave life, the symbol of their greatness, would become their ruin. Moses and Aaron stood by its waters. Moses raised his voice. "This is what the Lord says. Let my people go. If you don't, the Nile will turn into blood." Aaron stretched out his staff, struck the waters, and the river turned red. Fish died. The stench filled the land. Wells, springs, and streams turned to blood. Egyptians tried to find clean water, but there was no place the judgment hadn't touched. Pharaoh arrogantly said, "My magicians can do the same." But the ground had already begun to tremble, and Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Despite the warnings and the signs, he stubbornly refused to release Israel. Then the Lord spoke again to Moses. "Stretch out your hand over the waters, and frogs will cover the land." Aaron obeyed. When his staff touched the streams, waves of frogs burst forth by the thousands. They flooded palaces, overflowed into homes, leaped onto beds, crept into kitchens, ovens, and food. Egypt became a living swamp where there was no place without croaking and jumping. Desperate, Pharaoh pleaded with Moses, "Pray to your God to take these frogs away, and I'll let your people go." Moses interceded, and the frogs died. But the stench of their rotting bodies covered the entire nation. When the king saw that calm had returned, he hardened his heart again. He didn't keep his word. Then came the third plague. God said, "Strike the dust of the earth, and it will turn into gnats." Aaron stretched out his staff, struck the ground, and the dust rose like thick smoke. As it settled, it transformed into swarms of gnats that clung to people and animals. No one escaped the torment. Egypt's priests tried to mimic the sign, but they couldn't. Then one of them whispered, fear in his eyes, "This isn't magic. This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh wouldn't listen. His pride was stronger than fear. And the fourth plague came. A deafening buzz filled the air. Swarms of black flies descended upon Egypt. Clouds of them flew into eyes, mouths, and windows. The stench filled the atmosphere. But in the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, not a single fly was seen. Afflicted, Pharaoh relented. "Go and worship your God, but do it here in Egypt." Moses replied firmly, "We must go into the wilderness where the Lord has commanded us." The king gave in a little more. "Then go, but don't go far." Moses prayed, and the flies vanished. However, as soon as the buzzing stopped, Pharaoh's heart turned to stone once again. The fifth plague came quickly. "Tomorrow I will strike the livestock of Egypt with a plague," the Lord announced, "but the animals of Israel will not be harmed." At dawn, Egypt's fields were filled with lifeless bodies. Cows, sheep, horses, oxen, all dead. But in Goshen, the animals grazed in peace. Even so, Pharaoh, staring at the devastation, still refused to free Israel. His stubbornness seemed endless. Then came the sixth plague. Moses and Aaron took ashes from a furnace and scattered them into the air. As they touched Egyptian skin, they turned into painful sores, into ulcers that burned like fire. Even the palace magicians couldn't stand in front of Moses. But Pharaoh, wrapped in his arrogance, still wouldn't yield. The seventh plague shattered the skies. Moses raised his staff, and from the heavens came a storm like Egypt had never seen. Hail mixed with fire fell from the sky, destroying fields, trees, animals, and people. It was a heavenly fury that left nothing untouched. Pharaoh, trembling, confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord. Pray for me. If the storm stops, I will let your people go." Moses prayed, and the thunder ceased. But when the sun returned, so did the hardness of the king's heart. The eighth plague darkened the skies, not with clouds but with locusts. Countless swarms covered the sky and descended like a devouring army. They consumed what little green was left in Egypt. Not a single leaf remained. Pharaoh, now truly desperate, said, "I have sinned. Pray to your God to take this disaster away, and I'll let you go." Moses cried out, and a strong wind swept the locusts into the sea. But once again, the promise was broken. Then came the ninth plague. Moses stretched out his hand, and darkness fell over Egypt. 3 days without light, no sun, no fire, no lamp. Darkness you could feel. Men stumbled, fear paralyzed. But in Goshen, the children of Israel had light. Pharaoh broke and said, "Go, but leave your livestock here." Moses refused. "Everything we have will go with us." The king's face hardened. "Leave. I don't want to see you again. If you return, you will die." "Very well," Moses replied. "You will never see my face again." And so the final plague was announced, the last night. Death was drawing near, unseen, unstoppable. God told Moses, "One more plague, and Pharaoh will let you go. At midnight I will pass through Egypt. Every firstborn will die, from Pharaoh's son to the son of the servant. But among the Israelites I will make a distinction." God gave instructions. This would be the first Passover. Each family had to take a spotless lamb, sacrifice it, and mark their doorposts with its blood. The blood would be the sign. Where it was found, judgment would not enter. That night the Hebrews ate in haste, with sandals on their feet and staff in hand, ready to leave. Night fell, and the silence grew thick. At midnight, the angel of death swept across the land, and then the cries began. Pharaoh's firstborn lay lifeless. The servants' firstborn too. Even the animals weren't spared. In every Egyptian home there was weeping. A collective wail rose to the heavens. Egypt was brought to its knees. Pharaoh summoned Moses, his voice barely a whisper. "Get up, leave, take your people, your herds, your possessions, and bless me too." And just like that, after 430 years, the children of Israel walked free. The chains were broken, slavery was behind them, because God had heard their cry. And Egypt was never the same again. They marched out like a newly freed people. Men, women, children, and elders, from the strongest to the frailest, all moved forward, carrying their belongings, their livestock, and the gold and silver the Egyptians had given them in fear. Egypt didn't just want them gone, they begged to forget them, terrified of Israel's God. But it wasn't over yet. Though judgment had fallen, the final battle still waited. God didn't leave them alone on the journey. By day, a pillar of cloud led the way. By night, a pillar of fire lit their path. Moses walked ahead, guided by God's promise. But the enemy hadn't had its last word. "What have we done?" they cried in the palace. "We let the Hebrews escape. We must bring them back." Filled with fury, Pharaoh gathered his army, 600 of his best chariots, thousands of warriors, Egypt's most feared horsemen. Burning with rage, they set out after Israel. God's people kept moving. Children laughed in innocence. The elderly sighed in peace. But then, from the back of the column, screams rang out. Terror spread fast. In front of them, the Red Sea. Behind them, Egypt's army. There was no way out. The desert had trapped them. The people cried out to Moses, panicked. "Did you bring us here to die? Were there not enough graves in Egypt?" Fear stole their faith. Panic drowned their hope. But Moses didn't flinch. He knew something they didn't yet grasp. "Don't be afraid," he shouted. "Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, because the Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again. The Lord will fight for you. Just be still." God spoke to Moses, "Raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, so my people can walk through on dry ground." Moses obeyed. The wind howled, fierce and mighty. The waters split in two, a wall of water on the right, a wall on the left, and in between the path to freedom. The people watched in awe. One by one they stepped forward. The ground was dry. The sea bowed to the Creator. Children ran ahead. The elderly moved forward with tears of gratitude. The Lord's glory surrounded them like a shield. But the Egyptians didn't stop. "Chase them, catch them," they shouted. The chariots entered the sea. But suddenly the wheels jammed. Horses stumbled. Chaos broke out among the soldiers. "The Lord is fighting for Israel," they cried. But it was too late. God spoke again to Moses. "Stretch out your hand over the sea so the waters come back over the Egyptians." Moses raised his hand. The wind shifted, the waters roared and crashed back into place. The sea slammed shut, swallowing chariots. The riders and soldiers, the mightiest army fell, without a single sword. Pharaoh, powerless, watched his empire vanish beneath the waves. On the shore, Israel stood watching. The enemies they once feared were now just bodies drifting. Israel saw what the Lord had done, and in that moment, they believed. They lifted their voices in worship. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, both horse and rider, he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, he has become my salvation." The women danced, the elders wept with joy, because on that day Israel stopped being slaves. That day Egypt was defeated. That day God was glorified among the nations. They crossed the sea. Egypt was behind them, but freedom wasn't just about broken chains. God hadn't set them free to wander aimlessly. He brought them out to make them his own people. And before entering the promised land, they had to receive his law. On Mount Sinai, God would seal an eternal covenant. "Say these words to Israel. You saw what I did to the Egyptians, how I carried you on eagle's wings. If you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you'll be my treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." Moses came down, gathered the people, and repeated everything the Lord had said. And with one voice they answered, "We will do everything the Lord has said." On the third day, the mountain shook. Thunder split the sky. Lightning lit up the heights. A thick cloud descended on the mountain. The blast of a heavenly trumpet echoed with power. The people trembled. Elders fell to their knees. Children hid in their mothers' arms. The Lord had come down in fire. The mountain was wrapped in smoke. God's voice thundered like a storm shaking the earth. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image, nor bow down to it. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. The people listened. Fear filled their hearts. They backed away, trembling. Then they said, Moses, you speak with God, and tell us what he says. But let him not speak to us directly, or we'll die. And Moses answered them, Don't be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of him will be with you to keep you from sinning. And do not return to sin. That's how the Lord gave Israel his law, a sacred covenant that would make them his holy nation, set apart for him. But the people's hearts still weren't ready for full obedience. And while Moses was still up on the mountain, Israel would face its first major downfall. Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. There, the Lord himself wrote the covenant tablets with his own finger, but down in the camp, faith began to fade. Some started murmuring, Moses is gone. Who's going to lead us now? Aaron, confused and afraid, answered, What do you want me to do? They said, Make us a god who will go before us. We don't know what happened to Moses. So Aaron took the people's gold, melted it down, and shaped a calf from it. Then they declared, This is your God Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. They gave themselves over to idolatry, dancing, singing, offering sacrifices, bowing before a man-made image. Up on the mountain, the Lord saw it all. Go down, Moses. Your people have sinned. They've turned from the path. Let me destroy them, and I'll make a great nation out of you. But Moses pleaded passionately, Lord, if you destroy them, the nations will say, You brought them out just to kill them in the wilderness. Forgive them, don't wipe them out. The Lord listened to Moses' cry, but sin would not go unpunished. Moses came down carrying the tablets in his hands, and when he saw the scene, his heart burned with indignation. The people were dancing before the idol, as if they'd completely forgotten the God who saved them. Didn't you hear his voice? At Sinai, have you already fallen this far? With holy anger he threw down the tablets and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf, burned it, ground it into powder, mixed it with water, and made the people drink it. Then he cried out, Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. The sons of Levi stepped forward, and that day judgment fell on the rebels. 3,000 men perished, and the people were brought low. Moses went back up and pleaded again, Lord, if I've found favor in your eyes, show me your glory. The Lord answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, but you will not see my face, for no man can see me and live. God renewed his covenant and gave new tablets. His presence came down like a cloud upon the mountain. From that day on, Israel was no longer just a freed people. They became a consecrated nation, shaped and led by the living God. But their journey was far from over. Their greatest test still lay ahead. Israel had received the law. They had seen the fire on Sinai. They had heard the voice of the Most High, but God didn't choose them just to give them commandments. He longed to dwell among them. That's why he gave the instructions for building his sanctuary. Tell them to make me a tabernacle so I can dwell among them, the Lord said to Moses. You must build it exactly according to the pattern I show you. Gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, purple fabric, acacia wood, precious stones, materials chosen for a place that would house the glory of the Eternal. Moses gathered the people, and the Israelites brought their offerings generously. The craftsmen, filled with divine wisdom, began the work. Curtains were woven, the ark was carved, the lampstand was cast, the altar was sanctified. And when the tabernacle was finished, the cloud of God descended and covered the entire place. The Lord filled the sanctuary with his glory, so intense that even Moses couldn't enter. By day, the cloud rested over the camp. By night, a flame burned in their midst, and whenever the cloud lifted, the people knew it was time to move. The Lord himself was guiding them. He was with them. But even though his presence surrounded them, the hearts of the people remained stubborn. What was coming next would put their faith to the test. The people left Sinai. The promised land wasn't far now. But the road there wouldn't be easy, because even though God had taken Israel out of Egypt, there was still a lot of Egypt left inside Israel. And that inner struggle would bring consequences. Soon they started complaining. "We don't have water," they cried. "Did Moses bring us here to die of thirst?" Moses cried out to the Lord, and he made water flow from a rock. But it wasn't long before they said, "We don't have food." In Egypt we had meat and bread, so God sent manna from heaven each morning like dew on the ground. And in the evening quail filled the camp. Yet even then they kept murmuring, complaining, rebelling, until the day came when they made their biggest mistake. They were right at the edge of Canaan, just one step away from receiving the promise. Moses sent 12 spies to explore the land. They came back after 40 days carrying enormous fruit, but they also came back with fear. "The land is good," they said, "but its people are giants. The cities are fortified. We'll never beat them. They'll destroy us." The people listened, and fear took over their hearts. That very night, they rebelled. "Let's go back to Egypt." "We won't." "Enter." Joshua and Caleb cried out, "Don't be afraid. If the Lord delights in us, he'll give us this land. Don't rebel." But the crowd wanted to stone them. At that moment, the glory of God descended. "How long will they treat me with contempt?" said the Lord. "You will not enter. This generation will die in the wilderness. Your children will inherit the promise, but you will wander for 40 years. Moses fell to the ground begging. The people wept. But the verdict was set. They would never step into the promised land, but the rebellion wasn't over. In the middle of the desert, a man named Korah rose up with arrogance against Moses. Alongside him, 250 men joined in open defiance. "Who gave you authority over us?" Korah asked proudly. "Aren't we all holy? Why do you elevate yourself over the Lord's people?" When Moses heard this, he fell to the ground, broken. Then God spoke in judgment. "Tomorrow I will show who belongs to me, whom I have chosen." The next day, Korah and his followers stood before the tabernacle. The people gathered to watch. Moses said, "If these men die like anyone else, then I have not been sent. But if the earth opens up and swallows them alive, then you will know that they have provoked the Lord's anger." At that very moment the ground shook. A crack split open. Korah and all who followed him were swallowed alive. The people ran in terror. That day Israel understood that the Lord does not tolerate rebellion. The years went on. 40 years in total they wandered through the desert. The old generation passed away, and a new one was formed under the guidance of the Most High, sustained by his constant faithfulness. Slavery in Egypt was now just a distant memory. The people now stood at the edge of the promised land. But before crossing the Jordan, they still needed to receive one final teaching. Moses gathered the entire assembly. Thousands stood in silence before him. Their faces reflected anticipation. Their hearts beat fast. Then Moses began to speak. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words I command you today are to be upon your heart. You shall teach them to your children. Talk about them at home, when you lie down, when you rise up. Bind them on your hand. Wear them as a sign between your eyes." The people listened without moving a muscle. Moses' voice wasn't just instruction. It was a warning. When you enter the promised land, do not forget the Lord. Do not bow to the gods of Canaan. Do not break the covenant. If you obey, you'll be blessed among the nations. You'll live in houses you didn't build, harvest vineyards you didn't plant, and the Lord will fight for you, because he is your God and you are his people." Moses looked around. He saw the innocent eyes of children, the wise faces of the elders, the brave hearts of the young. And he knew his mission had come to an end. Because the Lord had already told him, "You will not cross the Jordan, you will not enter the land." Then God called him, "Climb Mount Nebo, look at the land from afar, but you will not go in." Moses had led Israel for 40 years. He had spoken with God face to face. He had seen miracles that defied all logic, but now he had to pass the leadership on. God had chosen Joshua, a faithful warrior, to lead the people into conquest. Moses called Joshua before the whole assembly. He laid his hand on him and declared, "Be strong and courageous, for you will bring Israel into the land. The Lord goes before you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid or discouraged." Joshua bowed his head. The people stood in silence. There was a new leader among them, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, had to ascend the mountain from which he would not return. He walked alone, step by step up the slopes of Nebo. The wind blew strong up high. From the summit, he looked out over the Jordan, the fertile fields of Jericho, the green hills of Canaan, the land God had promised to Abraham. He saw it, but did not step on it, because his journey had reached its end. Moses took a deep breath, his gaze lost in the horizon, and in the stillness of the mountain God called him home. On top of Mount Nebo, Moses closed his eyes. There he died, alone, wrapped in the divine presence. There was no ceremony, no known grave, because God himself buried him in a place that no one has found to this day. Israel mourned for him 30 days. They grieved with all their heart. But then Joshua drew his sword and turned toward the promised land, and God spoke, "My servant Moses is dead. Now arise, cross the Jordan, because the land I promised to your ancestors, I now give to you. Be strong and courageous. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." And so the life of Moses came to an end. He never stepped into the promised land, but he left behind a legacy that transcended generations. The law God gave him lived on in the hearts of his people, and his name was never forgotten. For never again did Israel have a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you deeply for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the book of Exodus. This project has been a work of faith and dedication. Months of effort, sleepless nights, prayers and resources were poured into bringing this story to life with as much faithfulness, excellence and emotion as possible. But it was all worth it, because this isn't just the story of Moses, it's the story of God's people, a story of freedom, faith, failure, redemption and hope. And it still speaks to us today. Now more than ever, we need your support. If this film touched your heart, made you reflect or brought you closer to God, we ask that you share it, like it, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this isn't the end. The story continues. Very soon, we'll release the film of Elijah, a new chapter in this epic series, where we'll witness the prophet who challenged kings, called down fire from heaven, and walked in boldness under the anointing of God's Spirit. And before you go, in just a few seconds, you'll see 2 videos on screen specially selected for you. If you want to dive deeper into one of the most fascinating accounts in the Bible, watch our film on Revelation, where we explore its prophecies, visions, and the final destiny of mankind. Or immerse yourself in the story of Daniel, a man who challenged kings and received visions about the end times. Pick one and keep discovering the eternal mysteries of God's Word with us. See you in the next video. May God bless you. Amen.